You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Kelly Barner, and today is Friday, March 3rd, 2023.
6.
Today's episode of Procurement 6 is brought to you by National Salesperson Day, which happens to be today. I was wondering how we are supposed to celebrate this holiday. So to learn more, and to be trendy at the same time, I asked ChatGPT for suggestions. The response I received included sending a thank you note to express your appreciation for how suppliers have helped your company, sharing a positive review, or in the context of B2B buying, offering a testimonial or an endorsement, or maybe providing feedback about their performance so they can continue to improve and grow. If salespeople don't continue to do their jobs, then we won't have the opportunity to do ours. Thank you for all of the sparring, competition, support, and insights we share over the course of the year. Happy National Salesperson Day to any supplier reps we might have listening in.
5.
In this week's podcast, Philip Eidson and I shared our key takeaways from Digital Outcomes 2023, a 2-day virtual event Art of Procurement hosted in February. As you might expect, we heard lots about risk. Joe Peterson talked about cyber risk, Gavin Maliner talked about the risk of failure, and Jack Freeman from Peakspan Capital talked about the very real risk founders take when they enter the startup arena. Let's listen to Phil share his takeaway.
And something, again, Jack Freeman said in his session with me, and this is something that's really shaped my thinking over the past 2 or 3 months, based on notes that you took when you did a pre-interview. So we do in all of our sessions, have conversations leading up just to have an idea about what the speaker is interested in talking about. And Jack shared in that pre-interview, but also then in the conversation that we had at Digital Outcomes, how, just because some procurement organizations are embracing these new ideas or new technologies doesn't mean that procurement as a whole is increasing their adoption of different ideas, of different technologies, of different models. And that's where some of the not necessarily disconnect, but that's where some of the challenge comes in is, taking some of those ideas, again, mainstream, which is the whole idea of crossing the chasm. And that could be, if we're not successful of crossing that chasm with these new technologies and new ideas, displacing the status quo in procurement, that could ultimately be it's a big risk for procurement as a profession.
And I think you pointed out in your session at Digital Outcomes that it is a ridiculously small number of chief procurement officers that are on that digital leading edge.
Yeah.
I think he said, what, could he count them on one hand or two hands? But we're talking about single digits of people at large companies.
Yeah, we will look, I think that was from a Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 perspective, but he was basically extrapolating then to say, look, 5 to 10% is what we as an investor look at as being the addressable market right now of all of procurement, of the companies who are really interested in challenging the status quo.
Everyone wants to think of themselves or their team as innovators, as disruptors, as early adopters. Statistically speaking, however, 90 to 95% of us are not. It may sound deflating, but it is probably a good thing. It takes a steady, risk-averse majority to create stability for the solutions destined to gain traction. We each just need to recognize where we fit into the adoption curve so that we set ourselves and our providers up for success. To listen to our full conversation, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast.
4.
In the last segment, I mentioned Joe Peterson. She has expertise in cloud security, and cybersecurity, but perhaps more importantly for the procurement community, she understands the business considerations and implications of cyber risk. Joe was so thoroughly prepared for her session that we asked if we could share her notes in the form of a printed Q&A. We published them on the blog this week, and you can find them by clicking the link in today's show notes or by going to artofprocurement.com and checking out Cloudy with a Chance of Cyber Risk by Joe Peterson.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
In our most recent LinkedIn Snap poll, we wanted to better understand current benchmarking practices for assessing supplier diversity performance. We asked what you benchmark your supplier diversity programs against to measure their performance, and here is what we learned. 18% of supplier diversity programs aren't benchmarking their performance at all. 38% benchmark, but only against their own internally established goals. And then 36%, a close second place, benchmark against industry peers. But almost none of these benchmarking exercises take program maturity into account. Perhaps most importantly, we learned that your benchmarking and my benchmarking are not necessarily the same thing. So starting with are you benchmarking and moving on to how and what does that mean can make for a more fruitful conversation and a more effective supplier diversity program. To read more about the poll results and what we can learn from them, read How to Benchmark Supplier Diversity Performance at artofprocurement.com.
2.
This week's episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast gave me a unique opportunity to combine two personal causes. My love for procurement, of course, but also my respect for military service. I welcomed Harold Hendricks, a fractional chief procurement officer and the founder of Trans Executive, a company that deploys the procurement task force model to help procurement teams enable, optimize, transform, and rapidly deliver value. Harold spent 2 decades as a senior officer in the Royal Netherlands Air Force and working at NATO. This is where he experienced many of the frameworks and models he now applies to procurement. Harold leveraged his military experience to speak about how procurement can purposefully bring together different people and skills while still fostering trust and cooperation, as well as the leadership training and experience that are required to bring all of these moving pieces together successfully. I highly recommend listening to this particular episode. You can find The Sourcing Hero wherever you listen to podcasts or using the episode link in today's show notes.
1.
We were just talking about the importance of supplier diversity benchmarks. If you would like to learn more about challenges, best practices, and innovative ways to improve, join Art of Procurement and Supplier I.O. for an AOP Live session on the topic this coming Tuesday, March 7th. Phil and I will be joined by Eileen Bassam and Lois Eyecker from Supplier I.O. to discuss the results of their recent report on supplier diversity benchmarking. I hope to see you there, and we look forward to answering your questions live.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.